Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just dropped a bombshell that could change everything about the upcoming Trump-Putin summit. After speaking directly with President Trump, Zelenskyy declared that Vladimir Putin is bluffing about wanting to end the war in Ukraine. This isn't just diplomatic posturing, it's a strategic warning that could reshape the entire peace process. So what exactly did Zelenskyy tell Trump, and why does he believe Putin is playing games with global peace? To understand this explosive claim, we need to dive deep into the high-stakes diplomatic chess match that's unfolding right now. The world is watching as three leaders, Trump, Putin, and Zelenskyy, navigate what could be the most consequential peace talks since World War II.
And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders and also to President Zelenskyy. I think out of respect, I'll call him first, and then I'll call them after. And I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting, or I may say we can make a deal.
But according to Zelenskyy, one of them isn't playing fair. The story begins with a critical phone call that took place last Friday. Zelenskyy spoke directly with President Trump alongside White House advisor Steve Witkoff and European leaders. During this conversation, something remarkable happened. Witkoff, who had just returned from Moscow after meeting with Putin, delivered what seemed like promising news. He told the group that Russia appeared ready to end the war, or at least take a first step toward a ceasefire. This was the first such signal anyone had received from the Russian side. Everyone on the call felt positive about this development, sensing some kind of shift in Moscow's position. For a brief moment, it seemed like Putin might actually be serious about peace, but Zelenskyy wasn't buying it. Despite the apparent breakthrough, the Ukrainian president remained deeply skeptical of Putin's motives. His suspicions weren't based on gut feeling alone, they were grounded in hard intelligence from his military and security services. According to reports from Ukrainian intelligence and military commands, Putin is definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. Instead, all evidence points to the opposite conclusion. Putin appears determined to present any meeting with America as his personal victory, then continue acting exactly as before, applying the same relentless pressure on Ukraine. The intelligence picture that Zelenskyy is seeing is deeply troubling. Rather than scaling back military operations or preparing for peace, Russia is redeploying troops and forces in ways that suggest preparations for new offensive operations. Ukrainian military analysts are observing Russian force movements that indicate Moscow is gearing up for expanded attacks, not winding down for peace talks. This military intelligence directly contradicts any notion that Putin is genuinely interested in ending the conflict. As Zelenskyy bluntly put it, if someone is preparing for peace, this is not what he does. This creates a fascinating paradox at the heart of the current diplomatic situation. On one hand, Putin appears to be signaling through intermediaries like Steve Witkoff that Russia is ready for a ceasefire. On the other hand, Russian military actions on the ground suggest the complete opposite. Putin is simultaneously talking peace while preparing for war. This dual approach is classic Putin, using diplomatic engagement to buy time while continuing military operations. It's a strategy he's employed repeatedly throughout his career, and Zelenskyy recognizes the pattern. The timing of Putin's apparent peace overtures is also suspicious. After months of Trump's increasingly harsh rhetoric toward Russia, including threats of massive tariffs and sanctions, Putin suddenly becomes interested in dialogue. President Trump has made his position clear about meeting with Putin. He's described it as a feel-out meeting where he'll assess Putin's true intentions. Trump has stated he'll know within the first 2 minutes whether a deal can be made, and he'll immediately relay the parameters to European leaders and President Zelenskyy. But the proposed terms are already causing alarm. Trump has suggested that some territories might need to be swapped to create a lasting peace. He's pointed out that Russia now occupies prime Ukrainian territory, including valuable oceanfront property that Russia now controls.
Between the two leaders, I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelenskyy was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody. To the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven, and there'll be some swapping, there'll be some changes in land, and the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean, in real estate we call it oceanfront property.
These territorial discussions have sent shockwaves through Ukraine and its allies. The idea of trading land for peace brings back dark memories of failed appeasement policies from the past. Ukrainian officials have been firm in their response. They will not officially recognize any Russian-controlled territories as part of Russia, even if a frozen conflict becomes necessary. Zelenskyy understands the strategic implications of this Putin-Trump summit better than anyone. He knows that any meeting between the two leaders, regardless of its results, serves Putin's interests by breaking his diplomatic isolation. For nearly 3 years, Putin has been largely cut off from direct engagement with major Western leaders due to his invasion of Ukraine. A summit with President Trump would shatter that isolation and provide Putin with exactly the kind of international legitimacy he's been seeking. It would demonstrate to the world and to his own people that Russia remains a major power that cannot be ignored. This is why Zelenskyy insists that no diplomatic solution can be achieved without Ukraine's direct participation. He's pushing for a trilateral meeting between himself, Trump, and Putin, arguing that it's impossible to solve the conflict without Ukraine at the table. As one Ukrainian official put it forcefully, conversations between the U.S. president and Putin can be important for their bilateral track, but they cannot accept anything about Ukraine without Ukraine. This isn't just about Ukrainian pride or sovereignty, it's about preventing Putin from manipulating bilateral U.S.-Russia talks to Ukraine's detriment.
It is impossible to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no one will accept this. Conversation between the US President and Putin can certainly be important for their bilateral track, but they cannot accept anything about Ukraine without.
History is full of examples of great powers making deals about smaller countries without including those countries in the negotiations, and the results are rarely good for the excluded parties. Republican Congressman Don Bacon has drawn a powerful parallel to 1938, when Britain and France gave away Czechoslovakian land to Hitler without including the Czechs in the discussion. He warns that Trump must not repeat this mistake, emphasizing that any negotiation must include Zelenskyy and not reward Putin's invasion and war crimes. As he put it, we cannot allow history to repeat itself.
He should not be offering land for peace, Ukrainian land, and he should have President Zelenskyy at the table. It's too reminiscent of 1938 when the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the leader of France met with Hitler and gave away Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, and it came back so they had peace in our time. We don't want that. Any negotiation has to have Zelenskyy at the table, and we have to force Putin to agree to that. He doesn't want to have Zelenskyy at the table. He doesn't want people to see Ukraine as an equal to Russia, or Zelenskyy is an equal leader to Putin. And so that vision or that image is something he does not want. But we can't be giving concessions to Russia and rewarding an invasion, bombing cities, commit all these war crimes that Putin has done. And so I hope we see a Trump that we've seen in the last month, not the President Trump that we've seen the first 7 or 8 months of his presidency, where I thought he was way too weak on Putin. And so we want to see a stronger Trump standing up for freedom and standing on the right side of this war.
The pressure on Zelenskyy in this situation is enormous. He cannot appear to be torpedoing what Trump sees as a diplomatic initiative, especially after working so hard to repair his relationship with the American president over the past several months. At the same time, he cannot allow Ukraine's interests to be sacrificed for the sake of a quick diplomatic win that might not actually advance the cause of peace. This delicate balancing act requires Zelenskyy to be supportive of Trump's efforts while simultaneously warning about Putin's potential deception. Meanwhile, the new American administration is sending clear signals about its changing approach to the conflict. Vice President Vance has stated unequivocally that America is done with the funding of the Ukraine war business. The administration's position is that if Europeans want to continue supporting Ukraine militarily, they'll need to step up and pay for it themselves, though the U.S. would still be willing to sell weapons to European buyers.
Bluff, we have been aggressively working, trying to break the logjam. One of the most important logjams is that Vladimir Putin said that he would never sit down with Zelenskyy, the head of Ukraine, and the president has now got that to change. We're at a point now where we're now trying to figure out, frankly, scheduling and things like that around when these three leaders could sit down and discuss an end to this conflict. If you take where the current line of contact between Russia and Ukraine is, we're going to try to find some negotiated settlement that the Ukrainians and the Russians can live with, where they can live in relative peace, where the killing stops. It's not going to make anybody super happy. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians probably at the end of the day are going to be unhappy with it. But I don't think you can actually sit down and have this negotiation absent the leadership of Donald J. Trump. And I think the president and I certainly think that America, we're done with the funding of the Ukraine war business. We want to bring about a peaceful settlement to this thing. We want to stop the killing. But Americans, I think, are sick of continuing to send their money, their tax dollars to this particular conflict. But if the Europeans want to step up and actually buy the weapons from American producers, we're okay with that, but we're not going to fund it ourselves anymore.
This shift in American policy adds another layer of complexity to Zelensky's calculations. Without guaranteed American military support, Ukraine becomes even more vulnerable to Russian pressure. This makes the outcome of the Trump-Putin summit even more critical for Ukraine's survival as an independent state. Zelensky's intelligence sources are painting a clear picture of Russian intentions. Rather than preparing for a post-war situation, Russian forces are positioning themselves for continued conflict. Military units are being repositioned not for defensive purposes or demobilization, but for offensive operations. Supply lines are being reinforced rather than reduced. New equipment is being moved to the front lines rather than pulled back. All of these indicators suggest that Putin sees the current diplomatic engagement not as a path to peace, but as an opportunity to improve Russia's military position while the world focuses on potential negotiations. The Ukrainian president has been consistent in his analysis of Putin's psychology throughout this conflict. He understands that Putin doesn't just want territorial gains from Ukraine, he wants the complete subjugation of the Ukrainian state. Putin's ultimate goal isn't a negotiated settlement that leaves Ukraine as an independent, Western-aligned democracy. His goal is the destruction of Ukrainian sovereignty and the installation of a puppet government in Kiev that would serve Russian interests. Any ceasefire that doesn't address this fundamental Russian objective would simply provide Putin with time to regroup and launch an even more devastating offensive. President Trump himself has acknowledged the complexity of the situation. In discussing his upcoming meeting with Putin, he's been clear about his role as a mediator rather than a deal maker. As Trump explained, he's not going to make a deal because it's not up to him alone. He'll meet with Putin, assess the situation, then immediately contact President Zelenskyy and European leaders. His goal, as he put it, is simple: to get rid of a war that somebody else started.
Consider inviting President Zelenskyy to join.
So you have to understand, this is a war that should have never happened. This is a war that wouldn't have happened if I were president. It would have never happened. It was the apple of his eye. I got along very well with President Putin. But if you look, under President Bush, they took a lot of territory. Under President Obama, they took a lot of territory. Under Biden, they essentially took the whole thing. You know, it's just a question of time. Under Trump, you know what they took? Nothing. I was the one that said, you can't build your pipeline. That was half built. I came in, I stopped the pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 2. Nobody knows that, you know. Nobody ever heard of Nord Stream 2. You might have not even heard of it. Biggest pipeline in the world. I stopped it. I was not a friend of Russia, but I got along well with Putin. It's always good to get along with other countries if possible, but that doesn't mean you roll over like Biden did.
But Zelenskyy's warning suggests that achieving this goal may be far more difficult than anyone anticipates. If Putin is indeed bluffing about peace while preparing for expanded conflict, then any agreement reached without addressing Russia's underlying war aims could actually make the situation worse. The intelligence assessments that Zelenskyy is relying on extend beyond just military movements. Ukrainian intelligence services are also monitoring Russian domestic propaganda, economic preparations, and diplomatic communications for signs of genuine peace intentions. What they're seeing across all these channels appears to confirm Zelenskyy's assessment that Putin is not preparing for peace, but rather for continued conflict. Russian media continues to frame the war in existential terms. Russian industry continues to ramp up military production, and Russian diplomats continue to make maximalist demands that would effectively end Ukrainian independence. Zelenskyy's public declaration that Putin is bluffing serves multiple strategic purposes. First, it signals to Trump and other Western leaders that they should be skeptical of Russian peace overtures and maintain pressure on Moscow. Second, it prepares Ukrainian public opinion for the possibility that current diplomatic efforts may not succeed, maintaining support for continued resistance. Third, it puts Putin on notice that Ukraine will not be fooled by tactical concessions that don't address the war's underlying causes. The upcoming Trump-Putin summit in Alaska will be the ultimate test of Zelenskyy's assessment. If Putin arrives with genuine concessions and a willingness to address Ukrainian security concerns, it would suggest that Zelenskyy's intelligence may have been incomplete. But if Putin offers only cosmetic changes while maintaining his core demands for Ukrainian capitulation, it would vindicate Zelenskyy's warning about Russian bluffing. The world will be watching to see which scenario unfolds. Regardless of what happens in Alaska, Zelenskyy has made it clear that Ukraine will not accept any deal that compromises its fundamental sovereignty and security. He stated repeatedly that Ukraine will not cede territory currently under its control, will not abandon its NATO aspirations, and will not accept limitations on its armed forces that would leave it vulnerable to future Russian aggression. These red lines reflect not just Ukrainian negotiating positions, but the lessons learned from previous failed attempts to appease Putin's territorial ambitions. The broader implications of Zelenskyy's assessment extend far beyond Ukraine. If Putin is indeed bluffing about peace while preparing for expanded conflict, it suggests that the international community may need to prepare for a longer, more intensive confrontation with Russia. This would have enormous implications for global security, economic stability, and the future of international law. It would also validate those who have argued that Putin only understands strength and that diplomatic engagement without military pressure is futile. As the world awaits the outcome of the Trump-Putin summit, Zelenskyy's warning about Putin's bluffing serves as a crucial reminder that appearances can be deceiving in international diplomacy. The Ukrainian president's unique position as both the primary target of Russian aggression and the leader with the most to lose from a bad deal gives his assessment special weight. Whether Trump and other Western leaders will heed Zelenskyy's warning or whether they'll be swayed by Putin's diplomatic theater may determine not just the future of Ukraine, but the future of the international order itself. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Zelenskyy's message is clear. Don't be fooled by Putin's peace talk when his actions suggest he's preparing for war.